Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret history and little-known facts about your favorite music, movies, TV shows, and more. I'll allow myself to introduce myself. My name's Jordan Runtagh.
Oh, you went there. How many of those are buried in here?
That was, I think, the only one, really.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. What's your name?
My name's Jordan Runtagh.
And I'm Alex Heigl. And today, if you couldn't tell, we're going to be talking about a huge personal favorite of Jordan's. We are going to be talking about Austin Powers. You're getting nothing from me in terms of impressions today. Because you've tried to pull me into it before, and I'm not falling temptation to it today. Austin Powers turns 25 years old this month. And this is your writing. I'm throwing you under the bus here. If you'll allow me to share what I like to call BuzzFeed math for a moment, this means that we are almost equal to the gap between Austin Powers being frozen in 1967 and unfrozen in 1997.
Just a few more years.
Yeah, the distance from the movie is now the distance that he was away for, because that is how linear time works. Jordan, why don't you just fill us in?
I'm going to become inarticulate with how much this franchise means to me, and not because it was quoted ad nauseum on the playground, so I'm actually really glad you're not going to be doing impressions. Austin Powers came out when I was 10, and when I was 10, there were three things that I loved above all else: the Beatles, James Bond, and British comedy, especially Peter Sellers. So to me, this was like someone took an fMRI of my brain and just put it on the big screen with jokes that I could understand. I love everything about this. My mother was obsessed with Sean Connery. I recently came across a love poem that she wrote to him as a teenager in 1967. So he was a huge deal. Yeah, he was a huge deal in our house. The Peter Sellers James Bond spoof Casino Royale was my favorite movie around the same time that Austin Powers came out. And that was the movie that basically inspired Austin Powers. The Beatles are still my everything, and there's lots of little nods to the Beatles in there. Yeah, Austin Powers is a love note to all of my favorite things. It's a perfectly done homage to everything I hold near and dear, and I adore it so much. I have no snark. I have nothing particularly insightful to say.
I don't have a hot take about this movie either. It's perfectly fine. I have no ill will
fine means
towards
something
it.
very different to me than it does for you.
No,
fine for me is an insult. Fine
it's
to
not
you
an
is high
insult.
praise.
I can accept it for completely what it is and how successful it was at the time, and it's fine. I bear it no malice.
Have you seen it recently?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We watched. I don't think we made it through Gold Member, but we watched the first two back to back at some point in the pandemic. So I have seen it recently. I also saw this movie enough when I was a kid my dad loves this movie. So yeah, I lived this movie.
Do you think it holds up after you saw it?
Yeah, it's still very good. All of my gripes with Mike Myers occurred after this movie, so I have to get out of that. We're in a different time now. Before Michael Myers was the whatever he is now. I'll be diplomatic in consideration of you. All right. Here's everything you didn't know about Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery. All right. So, ground zero. Mike Myers was inspired to create the character of Austin Powers while driving home from hockey practice, and also by intimate time with his wife. You described this as the most Mike Myers-esque origin story you could imagine. He was driving home from hockey practice one night in the early 90s because Canada, and the song The Look of Love by Dusty Springfield came on the radio. And so you mentioned earlier that this movie comes from the 1967 spy spoof Casino Royale. Mike Myers also loved this, and that song was on the soundtrack. So you called it a psychedelic James Bond spoof. But Mike Myers idolized Peter Sellers, and so everything about that movie is already the sort of ground zero for Austin Powers, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and hearing this song, the song The Look of Love, made Mike nostalgic not only for the stuff that he loved in his childhood, but also this whole semi-mythical era of the 60s swingers. And it made him wonder, as I so often do, where have all the swingers gone?
Where have all the swingers gone? His quote around this was, where have all the swingers gone? The lounge lizard, the sort of louche hippie meets Hugh Hefner archetype of the 60s. They're probably just a couple of years out of being true flower children.
But they kind of like take advantage of all the free drugs and all the free sex of the permissive society. And you get people like Tom Jones and Sammy Davis Jr. and even Peter Sellers, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, and so apparently the song comes on the radio. It sparks a flood of nostalgia in Mike Myers, and he starts doing this. He starts doing the Austin Powers voice. He starts doing the accent and started using it to hit on his then wife, Robin, when they got home, using those well-worn chestnuts that I will not be doing at this show. You will not trip me into it. And his wife loved it so much that she urged him to write it all down.
And much like me, this subject matter was very near and dear to Mike Myers' heart, especially because of his father, Eric. Both of Mike Myers' parents were from Liverpool and migrated to Canada just shortly before Mike Myers' birth. So Mike basically grew up as like an honorary English citizen. I think his dad actually retained his English citizenship. And he loved all aspects of British culture. His dad would wake him up in the middle of the night if there was an old Peter Sellers movie on, like the Pink Panther or something on TV after their bedtime, which is adorable. And he grew up with British comedies, Dudley Moore and Peter Cook and Monty Python and The Goodies and Alec Guinness and the Ealing studio comedies. And this all formed the basis of his comedy background, which, sent him through to SNL, Wayne's World, Austin Powers, Shrek, I won't say The Love Guru, but, and beyond.
I was just about to say The Love Guru.
And James Bond was another family hero, particularly of his father. And, it made their family proud of their British heritage. And Mike Myers years later honored Sean Connery at his AFI tribute, which was absolutely adorable. It's on YouTube. You should totally check it out. And he tells him, "My dad was my hero, and you, Mr. Connery, were my dad's hero," which is one of the first of many times I'll get choked up during this episode. So Mike worshipped the Beatles also like any good Liverpudlian, and he's spoken at length about how they've inspired every creative impulse he's ever had, just like me. So these were all sources of great joy around the Myers household in Canada, and they all went into Austin Powers. Now, Mike's father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's around the time that Mike's career really began to take off in the early 90s. And it was obviously horrifying to watch his father lose his personality right before his eyes. And this clearly tempered his ability to enjoy his success. And he died shortly before the movie Wayne's World was released and made Mike a star around the world. And the fact that his father never got to see his success really haunted Mike, and probably does to this day. And I remember seeing him on Inside the Studio years ago, and he described his relationship with his dad by using this metaphor of a cashier at a casino. And he said words to the effect of, "Things would happen that were just chips, but when I told my dad, it would turn into money." And then that went away. And in the aftermath of his dad's death, he revisited all the things that his dad had loved and turned him on to. James Bond, Peter Sellers, the Beatles, all of which play a huge role in Austin Powers. So this was, in a sense, a way to connect to his heritage. And there's the song in Austin Powers' Goldmember, the third movie, called Daddy Wasn't There, which, bearing all this in mind, I don't think it's a joke. I think it all came from a very personal place for him, as a lot of comedy does. But now that we're talking about Austin's band, Heigl, I know you have some insights on them.
So I don't think many people would know this off the top of their heads, but the name of Austin's band in the film, anyone out there? Callers? Let's go to the lines. That answer is Ming T, which I don't remember.
It's on the drum.
Yes. Oh, okay. And so they're doing all those interstitial transition moments that are supposed to look like, I don't know, Beat Club or Laugh-In or whatever. And it's a throwaway bit. But that band was actually, in a certain sense, the birthplace of Austin Powers. There's some kind of axiom in the entertainment industry of all musicians want to be comedians and all comedians want to be musicians. So, George Harrison is a famous patron and friend of Monty Python. Surely there are other examples. I mean, the Beatles are hilarious in their movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Dave Grohl, I feel like
sure. So anyway, another theory. I love how we're delving deep into the psychology of Michael Myers. Besides making a tribute to his father, he also wanted to be in the Beatles. So he started a group with some of his LA buddies, including Matthew Sweet and Susanna Hoffs of the Bangles, who you call your third favorite Rickenbacker player. Who were the first two?
John and George. And then Susanna Hoffs.
They can't both be from the same band.
Sure whatever. And then Tom Petty's fourth.
So they actually gigged under this name, under Ming T, which sounds racist or dirty. I can't decide which.
Why can't it be
And-
both?
Yeah, exactly. Little column A, little column B. And so they all had aliases. Matthew Sweet was Sid Belvedere.
That's
Susanna
good.
Hoffs was Gillian Shagwell, which, of course. And Mike Myers came up with Austin Powers. They recycled the Shagwell joke later on, as we all know. So the name of this band comes from a fictional beverage company in an obscure Italian thriller from 1965 called The 10th Victim, which, another Bond connection, stars Ursula Andress. I've never seen this movie.
Oh, wait, I can take this. This is an incredible movie, and I cannot recommend it enough. It stars, as you said, Ursula Andress, who was the first Bond girl in Dr. No in 1962. It also stars Marcello Mastroianni, who's Fellini's famous leading man from 8½, and La Dolce Vita. And this movie, it's like a Kurt Vonnegut short story. It's just after World War III in the year 2079, and to prevent a future war, citizens with violent tendencies are all encouraged to participate in what they call the Big Hunt, which is this government-sponsored program where people kill for sport. And it's treated like the Super Bowl. It's like one of the biggest entertainment events of the year. So it's this weird thriller, satire, sort of sci-fi, sort of comedy. It's a really weird movie. It completely, I don't even know how to describe what genre it is. I've never seen anything like it. It's weirdly prescient when you think about reality TV and violence. Basically, in our culture.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like The Purge.
Yeah, oh, totally.
Do you know who was their first choice for Ursula Andress' character?
No, Monica Vitti?
Anne Margaret,
No way.
per IMDb.
Whoa, that's crazy. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that is an insane movie. And we'll talk more about The 10th Victim later, but that's also where a lot of the outfits and the inspiration for the fembots comes from as well.
Anyway, let's take a look at what went into the blender of Mike Myers' complicated psyche to create the character of Austin Powers. Obviously, we've got the whole East End swinging 60s, Cray Brothers, Michael Caine, swinging London, crime end thing. And you make the comparison. He makes Wes Anderson seem like a lightweight as far as cultural references. So go ahead, give us number one.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really insane the number of references that Mike Myers makes in these movies. I mean, it's like a mosaic of all my favorite bits of pop culture obscurities. And I won't bore you with all of them because there are so many. And there's probably a bunch in here that, I didn't catch. We'll never know what Mike Myers folded into this. But here's just a quick lightning round. From the spy realm, he borrowed from a host of James Bond spy spoofs in the 60s. There's James Coburn's Our Man Flint and In Like Flint. The
Is he
latter
watching
of which,
that?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
Austin cites as his favorite movie. I think it's in The Spy Who Shagged Me. The ringtone that plays whenever Basil Exposition calls, that's the sound that plays in Like Flint whenever the president calls Flint. So that's taken directly from that. There are movies from Dean Martin's Matt Helm franchise, the last of which was called The Wrecking Crew, which featured Sharon Tate, and Quentin Tarantino showed excerpts in it in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Is that when she's in the movie theater?
Yeah, she's watching herself
With her
in The Wrecking
feet.
Crew. There's Modesty Blaze, which is a British spy spoof from 1966 with Monica Vitti, another Fellini figure, I believe, and Terence Stamp, and it's based on a British comic strip character. There's a 1966 Italian superhero movie called Super Argo versus Diabolicus.
Hell yes.
Yeah, that's all I need to know, actually. That's all I know about that, and that's all I need to know.
Sold.
Yeah, sold. And much of Vanessa Kensington's outfits, the Liz Hurley character, are inspired by the sci-fi futurism of Barbarella, starring Jane Fonda, and the leather looks from The Girl on a Motorcycle, starring Marianne Faithfull. And as we've alluded to many times so far, there are bits of the Beatles movie A Hard Day's Night in there, especially in the opening musical montage when Austin's being chased by fans. A lot of those shots they're not even nods to, they're shot for shot takes from the opening sequence of A Hard Day's Night when the Fabs are being chased around Paddington train station. And a lot of the broad humor found in the Austin Powers series has its roots in the British film series called Carry On, which they basically make Benny Hill look like Masterpiece theater. They are very broad movies. They were like, I think there were like 20 something of them made between the 50s and the 70s. But as I said earlier, the spirit of Austin Powers can really be found in the 1967 movie Casino Royale, which was this insanely overblown James Bond spy spoof starring Mike Myers' hero, Peter Sellers. Ursula Andress is also in there. And Burt Bacharach wrote The Look of Love for this movie, which is the song that inspired Mike Myers to revisit the whole swingers era in the first place.
You said it was on the soundtrack. I didn't know it was written explicitly for the soundtrack.
Yeah. Have you ever seen this movie?
Nope.
It's really insane. It absolutely hemorrhaged money. It exhausted the goodwill of 5 different directors. It has 5 directors credited for this, including John Huston. And the cast is nuts. It has David Niven, Woody Allen, Orson Welles, William Holden. It's really, really crazy.
Is that a record of a movie chewing through how many directors?
5, I think.
Is that a record?
It's got to be up there.
I don't know enough to declare it a record.
I don't. It's
impressive.
It was kind of a. Yeah, it's a wild movie, and I love it so dearly, and apparently so does Mike Myers. And it also features a spinning bed, which Austin has on his private jet.
Of course.
So those are the movie references. There are also quite a few TV references too. Do you want to take us there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the musical scene transition with Ming T, as we mentioned, are from the groundbreaking 60s sketch comedy show Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. There's also, obviously, Monty Python is a huge influence, as it influenced everything, basically. I mean, I'm also not super well versed with British comedy, but weren't they just like, that was like SNL, like that in terms of cultural hegemony over there?
Yeah, I mean, the Goons, which was the radio show that Peter Sellers actually got his start on in the 50s, was probably ground zero, sort of the big bang of British comedy as we know it, as being this kind of zany, surreal, following in the mold of Lewis Carroll. Kind of like Lewis Carroll in drag, like absurdism with also randomly really broad humor in there too. I think that the Peter Sellers radio series with Spike Milligan, the Goon Show, was probably the first, but Monty Python was sort of the televisual version of that. Yeah.
Well, holy hell, you're really off the leash on this one, buddy.
Oh, this is stuff that I've been reading about since I was like 7, 8 years old. I love this stuff.
So anyway, much of Austin's swingerism is said to be based on a specific British disc jockey and TV chat show host named Simon D, who, this is a power move. Not only was he a snappy dresser, but he'd end every episode of his show by driving out of the TV studio in Austin Powers' car, which is a Jaguar XKE.
My dream car.
Oh, okay. And is joined by a woman in a leather miniskirt.
Who literally jumps in. She doesn't even open the car door. She hops into his Jaguar XKE and they cruise off. It's totally Austin Powers. It's like a scene out of Austin Powers. That's how the closing credits went for every episode of his show.
And if you wanted to get more specific and more obscure... There is apparently lesser known than all of these British show from the 60s called Adam Adamant Lives, which is a sci-fi show created by several people who worked on Doctor Who. And it's about an adventurer named Adam Adamant who is frozen in a block of ice by his nemesis in 1902, only to be woken up in 1966. Also the plot of Captain America. And it's meant to be a satirical look at contemporary Britain in the night. I just had to throw a wrench into your whole Anglophobia thing. It's meant to be a satirical look at contemporary Britain in the 60s through the eyes of an Edwardian gentleman explorer who struggles to adapt to the era. A man out of time, you might call him. And then it's revealed that his nemesis, known as the Face, has also frozen himself and come back to do battle with Adam Adamant and try to take over London. Also, like in Austin Powers, Adam Adamant teams up with the daughter or granddaughter of his sidekick from his own time. And so you take that, you throw it in a shaker, not stirred, with the spoof Casino Royale, and there out comes Austin Powers. You've distilled this movie down to its finest elements. All right. But we got to talk about...
I feel like the doctor in Jurassic Park with like the DNA sequence like on the screen dancing around.
Exactly.
Like John Hammond.
You spared no expense. Into another deeply granular detail of this film, talk to us about Austin Powers glasses.
Yes, I'm glad you asked. Austin Powers' famous horn-rimmed glasses. They have a lot of potential inspirations. I personally always thought that they were another nod to Casino Royale, since they're really similar to the kind that Peter Sellers' character wears. But they're also a nod to the character that Michael Caine played all throughout the 60s, Harry Palmer, in The Ipcress File, Billion Dollar Brain, and The Funeral in Berlin, all very famous sort of 60s London noir type movies. And when Mike Myers cast Michael Caine as Austin Powers' dad in Goldmember, Michael Caine supposedly wore his original glasses that he wore as Harry Palmer, which I love. But here's probably the most unexpected inspiration for Austin Powers' style: Stephen Hawking. The legendary astrophysicist, author of A Brief History of Time. Apparently, Mike Myers was looking through old photos of Stephen Hawking from the 60s and honed in on his shaggy hair and his horn-rimmed glasses. And there's a famous picture of Stephen Hawking at his own wedding in 1967, I think. And he does look just like Austin Powers. He looks cool as hell. And if you saw the movie The Theory of Everything with Eddie Redmayne, who played a young Stephen Hawking, you'll know what I'm talking about. He looks like he's playing Austin Powers. Definitely Google that. It's pretty uncanny how similar they look. And Stephen Hawking actually had an amazing sense of humor. Both he and Mike Myers appeared in a Monty Python reunion concert in 2014. And funnily enough, Stephen Hawking said he always wanted to play a Bond villain like Ernst Stavro Blofeld, which leads us to the Bond-specific references. Another lightning round.
Yeah, I mean, saying this movie's influence by James Bond is cartoonishly broad. So let's drill down. It's a Bond spoof, obviously, and nothing makes a spoof sing like specificity. The film I can't believe I pulled that off. I was like walking a tightrope.
Adamant, after all that, you were prepped.
I thought I was going to have a stroke. Austin Powers has multiple references to very specific moments in the Connery era James Bond films. The chest hair is a specific specific reference per Mike Myers. And obviously the Nehru jacket and bald head and facial scar and the cat, that is all James Bond's arch nemesis, as you mentioned before, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, portrayed by Donald Pleasance in You Only Live Twice. I love Donald Pleasance. We're going to get into, here's your first one. Donald Pleasance played Dr. Loomis, who is the Ahab to the serial killer Mike Myers in Halloween, which is one of my favorite pieces of media of all time. So there's our first Michael Myers connection. We also get into Dr. No. The shower sequence is a reference to that during the unfreezing. Austin and Vanessa's change of clothing during their dinner. And Vanessa's bikini is identical to Honey Rider's from Dr. No. All right, so 1 year later, From Russia with Love, what's the next one?
They modeled the Irish assassin who, they're joking about how they're always
his Lucky Charms.
Yeah, the Lucky Charms guy is modeled after Robert Shaw's character Red Grant, and Frau Bissina is partly modeled on Rosa Klebb.
And then a year later, we get probably my favorite of the Connerys, I think a lot of people's, Goldfinger, 1964. Random Task is very obviously modeled on Odd Job, including the scene where he throws a shoe. Odd Job famously had this razor-bladed bowler hat. That whole fight scene is a reference. Why are you gonna make me say this shit, Mike Myers? The character A Lot of Vagina is modeled on the after the name of Goldfinger's lady, Pussy Galore, which I don't know how the hell they got away with that in the 60s. And the Do you expect them to pay? No, I expect them to die is absolutely one of that's the line from Goldfinger that
do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
When he's strapped on the gurney with the laser, yeah.
Anyway, 2 years later, Thunderball. The whole killing people around the table, the henchman getting murdered, that is from Thunderball. The plot about stealing nuclear arms and holding the world ransom. The line about the swimming pool and sharks. The blackjack game. Speak of number two, the number two character is modeled on Emilio Largo. And here's another incredibly specific reference. Bond fighting a hench person in drag. Although, in both of those films, right, they don't reveal that person is in drag. Anyway, keep going. We're just not even out of Bond yet, out of the Bond weeds yet.
Oh, this is my favorite Bond movie. You Only Live Twice, 1967. The aforementioned Blofeld connection. And there is one line from You Only Live Twice that is taken verbatim for a scene in Austin Powers. It's a hot tub scene with Bond and his Japanese counterpart. And his counterpart says, oh, God, in Japan, men come first and women come second. Make of that what you will.
Now we're finally at a Connery Bond. On Her Majesty's Secret Service, 1969. Isn't this the maligned Bond?
If Connery had been in this Bond, it would have been the best Bond movie. It's with George Lazenby, who was only in this one. It's like probably the most emotionally complex and dramatic until Casino Royale, the Daniel Craig version in 2006. It's a good one.
Yeah. And that's where the crushed velvet suit with the frilly collar comes from. So.
Oh, exactly. It's the exact suit.
I'm glad it's undercut by that. You went on a rant about how emotional it was, and it's wearing a clown suit. That's fine, though. Diamonds Are Forever, 1971.
Connery's back for this one.
So's Blofeld.
Yeah.
And the film is also set in Vegas, like Austin Powers. Befitting a film that was just cut and pasted from a range of influences. Mike Myers only took 2 weeks to write the first draft of the script, probably because all he had to do was write jokes in between plot, details, wardrobe, and dialogue from 70 other things. At his wife's suggestion, the script is written in 1995. Mike Myers shows it to his Ming T bandmate Susanna Hoff's husband, who is Jay Roach. And Jay gave him 10 pages of notes back, which is far more than I would accept from you on anything. I jest. And Mike took it much better than I would have. He appreciated it. He said, everything Jay said made it better. And Myers ended up being a booster for him. He was grateful to him for polishing the script, and he wanted Jay to take a shot at directing the film. And... his only real experience at this point had been co-directing a 1990 comedy called Zoo Radio, which, if you know anything about that,
There's no Wikipedia page for it, which for me is my metric of, wow.
Yeah, good Lord. But so, the Austin Powers production company, New Line, understandably thought a movie about a 1960s swinger packed with references to woefully unhip culture from 30 years ago. They weren't going to give it to a second-time director. And head of New Line at the time, who was it? Did you get a name?
Michael DeLuca, I think his name was.
He stood up in the middle of the initial meeting with, I almost called him Austin, with Mike and Jay, and told Jay Roach, who are you? We're not just going to hire Mike's buddy. And so he watches Jay's directing reel and is even less convinced, calling it was bizarre, it wasn't a good reel, it was very low rent. But he came in and spoke about the movie and looked us in the eye and gave us his vision. And that is what got him the job. And it's not all he got for his efforts. He got a year free of AOL, just like everyone who ever went to a mall or had a mailing address in the 90s and got one of those CDs.
I used to use those as BB gun targets.
My dad hoarded them for just the off chance that we would need cases for stuff. Anyway, this launches Jay's career. He does Meet the Parents, Dinner for Schmucks, The Campaign, Trumbo, Bombshell. So Austin Powers not only gave him a career, but as we mentioned, like anyone in the world with a pulse, probably some dead people too, like Dead People Vote. I'm sure dead people got AOL mailers. There are numerous examples of product placement in Austin Powers, and one of them is AOL, which is his scene when he's trying to get online. But Jay Roach would only accept that product placement if they gave him a year of free internet. Hashtag 1997. And so there's supposed to be a scene where another cultural, very 1997 moment is a scene where Austin tries to show he's cool by drinking a Zima. Anyone remember Zima? BuzzFeed list?
Are they still around?
I think like the seltzer market came out and killed. Like White Claw was like, here's a far afield metaphor for you. White Claw was sort of the Nirvana to the Zima and Mike's Hard hair metal. Anyway, when Zima's parent company, Coors, realized that scene was mocking them, they withdrew permission, and Austin instead drinks a Tab soda, which is, as you mentioned, a better joke.
And having said all that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information right after this.
We mentioned earlier that for New Line, the production company that ended up making Austin Powers, this was a huge risk. This was not an obvious choice. And it's interesting that Mike Myers chose to make this instead of a third Wayne's World, which definitely seemed like the safer bet. Austin Powers, it comes after the huge success of the Wayne's World phenomenon. The first Wayne's World grossed $183 million in 1992, making it the best performing film adapted from an SNL skit ever. Its nearest competition is the Blues Brothers, which grossed $60 million less. The sequel, Wayne's World 2, did less well at the box office, but well enough to lead all concerned to seriously consider a Wayne's World 3. Instead, Mike chose to finish up his stint on SNL, which ended in January of 1995, and flesh out his swinging 60s spy character that would become Austin Powers. Just a quick kind of Wayne's World drama sidebar. The production of Wayne's World 2 was not a fun time. Director Penelope
Spheres. You keep Penelope Spheres' name out of your mouth. You better watch what you say about her. I love her. She did the Decline of Western Civilization. Which is like the first one is about the punk scene. The second was about the hair metal scene. They're both gripping. And the reason that she supposedly didn't work for a long time in the 90s was she was basically self-financing and self-directing the third Decline of Western Civilization, which is about like homeless street punks in LA.
Whoa.
And it is such a depressing left turn to the series. I mean, they all kind of have this intense pathos to them. Like they really get it, these iconic figures like these LA punks and like these hair metal guys. And then she drills into like the core of sadness they're incredible films. Anyway, I love her. And she's like been open about taking the like mainstream comedy garbage that she has directed. She's just like, I needed money to finish my other stuff, which I just love. I love her. Anyway, why did Mike Myers storm off the set of Wayne's World, Jordan?
Well, okay. So Penelope Spheres was replaced on Wayne's World 2, supposedly at the behest of Mike Myers because they had been fighting on the set of Wayne's World 1. He reportedly stormed off the set after there wasn't enough margarine for his bagel, only butter.
One of their big fights on Wayne's World was the Bohemian Rhapsody scene, because he's talked about how many times she made them do that, and he was like, I had a migraine and knots in my neck by the end of that day. So, yeah, they did not get along.
I think there were also like arguments over the final cut of the film too. So in the end, there was no more Wayne's World movies, which must have been a bummer for SNL creator Lorne Michaels, who produced the movies and presumably got a pretty big cut off the back end. And he must have been doubly annoyed to learn that the project Mike Myers was doing instead featured a main character that basically made fun of him. Dr. Evil was a note-perfect imitation of Lorne, Mike's old boss, from his voice to his physical mannerisms to his fussy personality. And Mike Myers tried to downplay it a bit in the press for the movie, saying that, there was more Donald Pleasance, who's the actor who played Blofeld, in Dr. Evil than Lorne Michaels. But many SNL veterans have come forward, many on the condition of anonymity because they feared Lorne Michaels' wrath, saying that this was obviously Lorne Michaels. One of the ex-cast members who wished to remain nameless told, I think it was Entertainment Weekly, it's a perfect caricature. His obsessing about minutia, the way he ends everything by bringing his pinky up and chewing his fingernail. This actor references the tantrum when Dr. Evil asks for sharks with frickin' lasers on their heads, but instead has to settle for ill-tempered sea bass. The actor says, I've seen that conversation between Lorne and the set designer 500 times at 10:30 on Saturday night. And even one of Dr. Evil's most famous lines, throw me a frickin' bone here, people, supposedly came from a script meeting between the writers back on SNL, and Mike Myers just stuck with him for years.
That's so funny. I truly had no idea, but it's all falling into place. The drama stemming from Mike Myers' Lorne Michaels impression did not stop there. Obviously, half of Wayne's World is Dana Carvey, immensely talented gentleman, but he felt that Mike Myers was just ripping off his impression of Lorne Michaels.
And it's a strange point to make, because if you're mimicking someone, how do you lay claim to that? You're mimicking something that already exists. But for impressionists, it gets a little trickier, because Dana Carvey says that when he started at SNL, no one was imitating Lorne, and he was the one who cracked it. And impressionists call it breaking the voice or getting the hook. When you find that one line that gives you like the music of a person's voice, it opens the it's the key that opens the door to their cadence and makes it so much easier for anyone to do it. I mean, you've got, wow for Christopher Walken, and not many people know that for Michael Caine. All those like one lines.
No, do the Godfather one now.
I can't do Godfather, actually. I mean, I can't do any of these, but I really can't do Godfather.
You have to do it.
I
can't get off.
I'm keeping that.
All right, so no Godfather impression. That's interesting.
I can't do it. No, that's old man. That's just like
just breathing, exhaling.
Yeah, he's wheezing. Yeah, I can't do it.
Oh boy. Anyway, Dana Carvey says he was at a script meeting when Lorne Meeting was, arranging the week's show, and he moaned, "I still have no f***ing first act."
Okay, do it like Dr. Evil.
I still have no f***ing first act. It's too Midwestern. Damn it, you tricked me. Ooh, Runtagh.
It's Lorne Michaels, technically.
And so anyway, Dana Carvey feels like he got these hooks. He feels like he cracked the impression. And he thinks Mike Myers ripped him off. And this also goes back to Wayne's World. He would say over the years since that the pair were not a comedy duo. Mike just originally put him into the Wayne's World sketch purely because Myers thought it would wind up on air if he put Carvey, who is kind of one of the shining lights of the show, in it with him. It was a mercenary move on his part, then it kind of took off. And the drama goes deeper, Jordan.
Yeah, Dana said that when they were working on the script for the Wayne's World movie, he was writing bits for it that just weren't making it into the script. Like, he would write it and then get another version of the draft back, and all of the stuff that he put in there wasn't there. And I guess 3 weeks before the shoot was set to begin, he actually quit the movie. He told this to Howard Stern a couple years ago. And purely because the stuff wasn't making it into the script, and he felt like there wasn't anything for him to do in it. So it sounds like things were already a little tense between him and Mike Myers, even before going into this whole Wayne's World adventure. And then this impression-biting thing went down, and there was kind of a Cold War between Mike and Dana Carvey for years.
Yeah, Dana Carvey would release a spy spoof of his own, which you may remember, a little film called The Master of Disguise. It opened in direct competition with Goldmember in 2002, and that did not go well. It's always hovers around the bottom of worst films of all time. I feel like this is violence directed at me personally, but the name of his Italian secret agent is Pistachio Disguisi.
That makes me so angry.
Oh, it's awful. But thankfully, they reached a détente, a rapprochement, in large part because of money. Why else? When they reunited as Wayne and Garth to make the Uber Eats commercial that referenced Wayne's World for the Super Bowl in 2021. So thank you to Uber for bringing Mike Myers and Dana Carvey back together. God, I hate that I just said that. Lastly, even though Dana Carvey has said that the Dr. Evil Pinky thing comes from Lorne Michaels, there's an alternative theory to that. There's an episode of The Twilight Zone called The Number 12 Looks Just Like You, which features a character in it that performs a very similar gesture by the name of Dr. Rex, an evil doctor. So make of that what you will. Don't you dare do it.
I'm not doing it. I didn't do it.
He didn't do it on camera, folks. Yeah. Jordan didn't do it on the call. Anyway, there could have been a very different interpretation of that character on screen.
Yeah, it's really weird to me that Mike Myers initially didn't want to play Dr. Evil himself, which was really surprising to me because Mike Myers is such a huge Peter Sellers fan. And he's talked a lot, at length about how the Pink Panther movies were such a huge influence on him. And Peter Sellers was very famous for playing multiple roles in the same movie. I mean, most famously Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, but also in The Mouse That Roared, The Prisoner of Zenda, and a few others. And I always assumed that this was Mike's tribute to Peter Sellers by playing a bunch of characters in the same movie. It was kind of his way of playing in the same arena as his hero. But I guess he originally wanted Jim Carrey to play Dr. Evil, which kind of rules, and you can kind of get a taste for what he would do with Dr. Evil in the Sonic movies when he played the bald villain Dr. Robotnik. But Jim Carrey was already committed to Liar Liar, which was probably a smart move in the short term because Liar Liar actually did way better at the box office than Austin Powers, which we'll get to later.
Yeah, I can see Jim Carrey in the middle of his world conquering phase coming out of the mid-90s, not wanting to play second banana.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
All right, well, moving on. More in alternate casting bits and bobs.
Yes. There's one bit of alternate casting that makes absolutely no sense to me. Apparently, Mike Myers wanted the role of Scott Evil, Dr. Evil's long-lost son, to go to Colin Quinn. Now, Colin Quinn would have been in his late 30s or pushing 40, I think, when this was being made. And, like, he never looked young. So I don't know if the whole idea was that they weren't even going to try to make Scott look young, and there was just going to be this middle-aged man acting like an angsty teen, and that was going to be the comedy, or what. But I have no idea. But thankfully, Colin Quinn turned it down, and he explained why in an interview with the AV Club. He said, Mike Myers called me up and asked me to be the son in Austin Powers, but I was writing a screenplay at the time called Midnight Mass. You've probably never heard of it because it was never produced. I've never regretted anything except that. I am actually very glad that Colin Quinn didn't get the part because I can't imagine anyone doing a better job than Seth Green. At the time he received the script, he was playing a character named Bobby in the David Mamet play American Buffalo, which is this deep, dark drama about greed and human fallibility and burglary. And Seth took that gravitas and that darkness into his, and that seriousness into his role in Austin Powers. And he later said, my head was in a spot about actor preparation, and all of my thoughts in respect to this character were to play it deeply sincere. I thought it would be funniest next to Mike's broad character. If you look at me in the movie, I'm in a drama. And it's so true. His sincerity and his deadpan delivery make him, to me, one of the funniest characters in the movie.
Yeah, he's great. And he's right, too. He's such an anchor amid all the other madcap bullshit that's going on. Another bit of alternate casting aimed straight at my love for brassy Southern women. Reba McEntire was an early consideration for the character of Frau Farbissina. And she is, of course, revealed to be Scott Evil's mother in a scene that... God, don't they use Let's Get It On for that? Is this ground zero for, like, the punchline of... I will never forgive them for doing that.
It can't be. That can't be.
Anyway, whatever. So, this is funny. Here, this will interest you. Frau Farbissina sounds like a made-up name. It is not. It's based on the Yiddish word Farbissen, which means sullen or crippled by bitterness, which is my Jewish rap name. So Mindy Sterling is that actress, and she, like a lot of people, was a veteran of the Groundlings in LA, the influential and launching pad comedy group. Yeah, she's ridiculous in a good way. So, I don't know. I think Reba would have done well with this. Like, it would have been a completely different, but, you know, it's the same kind of joke as the Colin Quinn thing. It's like so counterintuitive and so far afield that, yeah, I don't know. I think it would have worked. I like to think Reba McEntire could have pulled it off.
I love how much you love Reba McEntire. I didn't know this about you.
I just love brassy Southern women telling me to kiss their grits and, like, you know, holding a household in line and rolling their eyes at their husband. I just love it. It's Dolly Parton, Reba.
I just saw Steel Magnolias recently.
Yeah. Also, Rhea Perlman. You know, and you know how much I love Cheers. Rhea Perlman would have killed this.
Yeah.
She was also in talks to play Frau Farbissina, and she has also regretted that ever since.
Scheduling conflicts. The greatest enemy of fantasy casting.
Yeah, and while we're into the weeds on this one, Jordan, tell us about Mr. Bigglesworth.
Yes, on the topic of Dr. Evil's nearest and dearest, let's discuss his beloved cat, Mr. Bigglesworth. A shaggy Persian cat who's rendered hairless and really quite terrifying as part of the unfreezing process. And in reality, he's played by a Sphinx cat by the name of Ted Nugent. Insert cat scratch fever joke here. He has.
I hate Ted Nugent as any right-thinking person should. So it's fine.
This cat had a double who went by the name Mel Gibskin.
That's much better.
Yeah. And this cat... I love how much you love that.
This is a hairless cat named Mel Gibskin.
Yeah, it's great. And these cats were trained to remain calm in Mike Myers' arms when he screams as Dr. Evil and he's bouncing around and, sending one of his henchmen to his death. They were heavily trained to remain, placid and just stay in Mike Myers' arms for like 45 minutes, an hour at a time. And this movie led to a spike in interest around these unusual cats. But Mr. Biggleworth's trainer, a woman by the name of Lisa Ressler, offered a word of warning to the Orlando Sentinel in 1999. The Sphinx is not the ideal pet for everybody. It's not a maintenance-free animal. People assume that because it has no hair, it doesn't require grooming, but Sphinx cats need to be bathed at least once a week. You have to clean their ears and paws frequently because they have no hair to filter out dirt. You have to keep a Sphinx in a warm environment because, as she says, think of how you would feel if you were walking around your house in your underwear. So, the more you know.
Speaking of hairlessism, or the bald, I should have just said, Mike Myers has a thing against latex bald caps. He thinks they didn't look authentic, so he shaved his head to play Dr. Evil. Seth Green has a memory of seeing Mike Myers getting his head shaved the morning of the first shoot day and thinking, wow, he's really committed to this part. This is going to be a great movie.
And he's not wrong.
Yeah. Because, speaking of first shoot day, the first scene they shot for this film was the therapy session with Carrie Fisher, which has that iconic monologue. My dad got me a poster from Spencer's Gifts that had that whole Dr. Evil monologue on it, and my mom confiscated it and would not let him give it to me because it had the penchant for buggery, shaved scrotum, all of that. And yeah, Carrie Fisher, man, not many people. It was memory hold for me until we watched it last year. But yeah, so Carrie Fisher's in the SNL family peripherally. She's in the periphery because of Belushi and others. And Myers said that he was loosely acquainted with Carrie, which, as you mentioned, presumably through Lorne and Paul Simon.
Because she was engaged to Paul Simon, and Paul Simon's Lorne Michaels' best friend. So there's probably some connection there.
So Myers sent her the script, and she wrote him, quote, very lovely, supportive letter saying how much she loved the movie. She was so supportive during the shoot. She just kept giving me a hug and telling me, I just love this scene and how weird the choices are.
I want Carrie Fisher to give me a hug and tell me how she loves how weird my choices are.
Yeah, and she was doing all of her script doctoring at this stage. So that's praise from Caesar. And so the father and son from the beginning of that scene are the same father and son from the Bud Light commercial. The I love you, man, and you're not getting my Bud Light, Johnny. I'm not doing impressions. You gonna do impressions? You gonna impressions that commercial? All right, fine. Good.
If you know it, you know it. If you don't, move on.
And while we're just running down weird cameos and credits. As we just continue our Rolodex of the 90s, the Soup Nazi, folks, do you remember the Soup Nazi from Seinfeld? Do you remember the 90s? Do you remember feeling hope? The Soup Nazi has a cameo in Austin Powers. Larry Thomas is the guy who played that character. He is in the blackjack scene. You have 21, sir.
Oh, yeah.
I suggest you stay. And Jay Roach and Mike Myers offered him that just because of Seinfeld. So, speaking of small parts, no small actors, only small parts. No small I don't know what it is. Whatever. Go.
Will Ferrell has his first credited movie role in Austin Powers. Not especially groundbreaking news here, but Will Ferrell played the role of the henchman who won't die, Mustafa. Mm-hmm. Not Mufasa, Mustafa. And this is his first credited movie role, though we did have an uncredited cameo. It's probably not a cameo, probably just an uncredited role as a newscaster in the film Criminal Hearts. And while we're talking about henchmen that get bumped off, Heigl, I know you love the Halloween franchise. I'll let you take this one. But there is a Mike Myers connection here that I love so much.
A moment. Dun, 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 dun. We fade that in and turn that into, we do a mashup of that and Soul Bossa Nova.
Yeah.
So, dun, 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 dun. I'm not going to do that, but you should, or someone else should. Someone do that and we'll send you some iHeart money. That is not a binding agreement, folks. Not legally binding. Anyway, Michael McDonald, tremendous actor, comedian in his own right, frequently confused with Will Ferrell because they were both tall, goony-looking guys playing ridiculous against-type characters in sketch comedy shows from the 90s. He was on Mad TV.
He was I think, the longest
caster. Yeah. And so he plays the guy who's run over by Austin Powers extremely slowly, which always struck me. Is that a fish called Wanda bite?
Oh, man.
Has to be.
Yeah, you're right. Whoa, good call. Good call.
And so he is in Halloween Kills, which is divisive as part of Danny McBride and David Gordon Green's what people are calling Hallow Green, because it's that modern trilogy. I don't know. He plays a character named Little John, who is murdered by Mike Myers. Spoilers. So, as someone on Twitter pointed out, this makes Michael McDonald the only person on screen to have been killed by both Mike Myers and Michael Myers. Anyway, how have we gone through this whole podcast without once mentioning Elizabeth Hurley? Another crush for young Alex. Folks, if you're keeping track at home, please don't. That's weird. Don't tell my wife. Liz Hurley. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Elizabeth Hurley, Jordan?
Yes, we have to talk about Mike Myers' co-star in this film, who isn't himself, the lovely and talented Elizabeth Hurley, who plays Vanessa Kensington. Her last name is a tribute not to the upscale London neighborhood of Kensington, but to a Canadian sitcom called King of Kensington, in which a teenage Mike Myers made his acting debut in 1976. One of several nostalgic nods to the Great White North that we'll find in this episode. At this stage, when she was cast in Austin Powers, Elizabeth Hurley was known chiefly in the press for being Hugh Grant's girlfriend, and Hugh Grant was very excited that she was going to act with Mike Myers. In fact, she recalls him saying that Mike Myers was one of the funniest comedians on the planet. And Hugh Grant actually knew this firsthand. When Mike Myers was first starting out in comedy just after high school, he moved to the UK briefly and formed a comedy duo with the fantastically named Neil Malarkey, who, as it happens, plays the clerk who gives Austin back his Swedish maid, Enlarger. He's the quartermaster after Austin's unfrozen, so he has a bit part in this movie too. So Mike Myers and Neil Malarkey tour England as Malarkey and Myers, the comedy duo, and they play a bill with a young Hugh Grant acting in another troupe called the Jockeys of Norfolk. So early on in both their careers, Mike Myers and Hugh Grant shared a stage together, or shared a bill, I should say. I think that's very interesting. So this was really Liz Hurley's first chance to show that she could carry a lead role, and she had a tough time making this movie for two reasons. One was that she couldn't stop cracking up. If you watch the film, you notice that she almost never makes eye contact with Mike Myers because she'd always break, which is adorable and understandable. The other reason was that she couldn't stop touching Mike Myers, and he apparently hated it. She recalled in 1999, "I'm ludicrously tactile, and Mike isn't at all. But because I was so obsessed with Austin, I used to torment Mike by squeezing, stroking, and petting him at every opportunity. When I see Mike now, I still launch massive physical attacks on him, which send him fleeing for cover." So that's interesting. Future Austin Powers heroines have echoed this personality quirk of Mike Myers. Heather Graham, his co-lead in The Spy Who Shagged Me, said, "He was totally unflirtatious with me, the least flirtatious person I've ever met. And in any romantic scene we had, he couldn't wait to get off the set. He was kind of like, let's make the best of this. Very polite. He was so sweet. He was so in love with his wife. Any other woman is probably chopped liver to him."
Yeah, I'm not going to be the guy that's like, "Oh, getting touched by Elizabeth Hurley is a bad part of your job." Like,
Right,
hubba, hubba.
yeah.
But
Right,
also cartoon wolf eyes, jaw slamming on the table, having to roll the tongue back up, hitting myself on the head with a hammer, etc. God, Liz Hurley. And while we're diving further into the recesses of Mike Myers' conscious or subconscious
Peccadillos.
Peccadillo. Ooh, great word. Peccadillos. He's super into toy soldiers.
I love this.
World War II is a major obsession. You can see him probably getting out some of that Jones in Inglourious Bastards, where he does that.
Oh, yeah.
I think he's doing basically a Peter Sellers, it seems like, in that scene.
I think so.
He's the guy who briefs Michael Fassbender on this mission. When he was profiled by Rolling Stone during the making of the sequel to the first Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, he described opening a box of Scottish infantry 8th Army soldiers, separating them and carefully clipping the extra elastic from each base before lining them up on the table. This is part of his profile. This was in a national magazine. He then explained how he loves to paint them and sometimes take Polaroids of them. And you wrote, "Not unlike Jeffrey Dahmer." Which is a good joke. I have to give
Thank
that's
you.
a good one.
Thank
But
you.
he does joke about it. He's has a modicum of self-awareness at least. He made a joke about it in the profile. So lest we paint Michael Myers as more of a off-putting weirdo than is just. Back to Liz Hurley.
Yes, the leather catsuit that Elizabeth Hurley's character, Vanessa Kensington, and her mother, Mrs. Kensington, wear in the movie. It's modeled after the one that Diana Rigg's character, Emma Peel, wore in the classic British spy series, The Avengers, that we touched on earlier. Both Elizabeth Hurley and Mimi Rogers, who played her mother, kept their leather catsuits as souvenirs from the production. Mimi Rogers has another connection to Austin Powers, although kind of more of a tangential one. In addition to playing Liz Hurley's mom, which is kind of rude because I think they're not too far apart in age. She was also married to Tom Cruise, who has a cameo in the movie inside a movie version of Austin Powers in the opening scene of Goldmember, the third installment in the franchise. And it's my understanding that Mimi Rogers was the one who introduced Tom Cruise to Scientology, which, in the interest of ensuring that my life doesn't become a living hell, I'll just say is great. Seems to have worked out really well for everybody. But the final scene of Austin Powers, the first one, when Austin and Vanessa walk around their honeymoon suite naked with their bodies strategically covered by breakfast foods and various items, that was filmed at the Scientology Celebrity Center. According to the Church of Scientology, these so-called celebrity centers were set up mostly to entice artists, politicians, leaders of industry, and sports figures to join the church. And the center in Los Angeles was, I think, the first to be established in 1969. I have no idea why they filmed the scene there. Maybe it was through Mimi Rogers. Maybe they were trying to entice Mike Myers and the rest of the cast to join Scientology. No idea. But while shooting this scene, Liz Hurley had tape applied to herself in strategic places to dissuade on-set photographers from taking photos and then selling these photos against her will to, people who buy that kind of thing. Liz Hurley has said that everybody knew each other so well at that point, so nobody was self-conscious. And the scene took all day to shoot because everything had to sync up and be perfectly choreographed. Mike Myers remembers that it took a lot of rehearsing, but he got the easy job because his path was written in like a pattern on the rug, so he could just see where he was going. But Elizabeth Hurley was, this is a quote from him because I'm not totally sure what it means, going off a reverse polarity screen camera left to camera right. So I guess she couldn't have her path drawn on the ground, so she kind of had to just memorize everything and do it all backwards. Like a weird dance that they had to choreograph, basically. And it was one complete take, so they had to do this 25 times. And director Jay Roach later said, it was a hilarious scene, but it was actually really stressful because we were starting to feel like we may never get it. And this scene caused some stress in a different way because it almost meant that Austin Powers got an R rating from the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, who's in charge of rating films. In The Hollywood Reporter's amazing oral history about Austin Powers, Jay Roach says, the nudity blocking was something the MPAA wanted to be sure we didn't go too far with. The cheeky phallic references, like Elizabeth biting the sausage and holding the melons up. But they were all pretty innocent body-shaped jokes. The only thing they asked us to do in the final cut, which was kind of surprising to me, was that they thought there was too much butt cheek on Mike when he got thawed out. So I went for a slightly more profile version of that scene.
Yeah, they ID that. The dick and balls shuttle gets a pass. God, the MPA is weird.
Yeah.
But, given how sort of exacting and fussy we've made Mike Myers to sound, and by his own admission, he is.
Yeah.
He said that 40% of this film was improvised. Obviously, the naked hotel room scene, heavily rehearsed, but he put the figure at 40% of improvised dialogue. The shh scene, the whole bag of shh down here with your name on it, is improvised. The whole Frau Farbissina bit with the Lucky Charms, also off the cuff. And oh man, I love Tom Arnold. I forgot. Yeah. He plays the cowboy, obviously, next to Austin Powers when he's doing the Who Does Number 2 work for.
In the bathroom stall.
And Tom Arnold's just riffing. And the line courtesy flush specifically.
Yeah, you said that that's something that people in Iowa say as a courtesy flush. And the best is that apparently he also improvised the, oh my God, what did you eat kicker of that whole scene, which is amazing.
And as you mentioned, a sort of return to form for Tom Arnold, who has been Also, in another film where secret agents fight and kill henchmen in a public restroom while one person is sitting on the toilet next to them. What film was that? Readers, callers, can we go to the lines? True Lies, 1994. Co-starring Jamie Lee Curtis, along with Arnold Schwarzenegger. There's another Halloween connection and another Fish Called Wanda connection. That's kind of a stretch. I shouldn't give myself that one. But I'll give myself we'll give it the Halloween one. Go ahead. What's your favorite, though? What's your favorite?
I think my favorite improvised line is when Austin and Vanessa Kensington are driving through what's meant to be the English countryside, which, as Austin notes, looks nothing like Southern California. The joke being, of course, it is Southern California because the production couldn't afford to travel to England for B-roll. It's impossible to overstate just how cheaply this movie was made. The $16.5 million budget is not a lot, and this goes a long way in explaining the insane cameo-filled movie within a movie of Goldmember, which has Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise, Gwyneth Paltrow, Danny DeVito, Britney Spears, Michael Bay level explosions, all sorts of crazy stuff. And I mean, they definitely, had earned it at that point.
16 million is like micro budget practically. They probably spent most of their money getting Burt Bacharach.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
We're shying away from the problematic aspects of this film, or at least not shying away from them, but at least not calling so much attention to them. But then there's the fembots. But they are a reference to different times. So at least it wasn't invented whole cloth. There's a cult film from 1965 called Dr. Goldfoot and the Bikini Machine. It's a parody. Dr. Goldfoot, obviously rip on Goldfinger.
The plot's absolutely insane if you haven't seen it. It's about this mad scientist who builds robots that look like women who are programmed to seduce and rob wealthy men.
And you mentioned The 10th Victim being a huge influence on this film before. Ursula Andress' character kills a character in that film after stripping for them, and she murders them with machine guns in her bra. So that was an antecedent, I guess. How does that even work? Whatever, we're not talking about that. And lastly, in Monty Python, the women at Castle Anthrax, which it's Michael Palin that they corner?
Yeah, it's Galahad. Yeah. Mike Myers, a big Monty Python nerd, as we've established, took some inspiration from these femme fatales, I guess. I always think of femme fatales as being more like film noir-y. These are kind of more
they call them vamps.
Yeah.
And one of those fembots is played by Cindy Margolis, who is a certain segment of this population may recognize her name. She claimed in the early years of the internet to be the most downloaded woman online. All right, let's get into more of the actual shooting on this and the toll it took on people, physical, mental, and emotional.
Yes, the fembots, they lurk throughout Dr. Evil's secret underground missile silo lair. In reality, this is a backup power plant for Los Angeles, which is dormant and unused the majority of the time. But unfortunately, when the Austin Powers production came to shoot, there had been a brownout in LA that weekend, and everything was switched on and extremely loud. And Jay Roach later said the decibel level was so high that everyone was required to wear sound-blocking headphones, and he directed everybody by screaming at them and using gestures. And they would really just only take off the headphones when they were actually shooting, and he said it was an unbelievable nightmare. And this is also the location where Austin does his 27-point turn in that cart. And Mike Myers later said that it was a really tricky scene because they were in this power facility where everything was incredibly delicate. And he said that just before they went to take the scene, they told him, by the way, if this car actually hits a certain part of this wall, it's going to cost us $100,000. So make sure to do it right. So the pressure was on for him to nail this. It looks like he's just screwing around, but it was actually a very heavily choreographed sequence as, like the fruit scene, like the naked fruit bit. Comedy is pain. And here, this will interest you. As Austin Powers and Vanessa Kensington escape from the underground facility, they run by Vasquez Rocks, which is a state park, which is a popular filming location for the original 60s Star Trek series.
Isn't that where Shatner fights the lizard monster?
You know what? It might be.
Anyway, Back to Liz Hurley. As all things drift, the arc of the universe bends towards Elizabeth Hurley.
Yes, even though this was a comedy, there were some scenes that were actually very dangerous to shoot. One that you might not expect was the romantic dinner scene on top of the double-decker bus cruising the Las Vegas Strip, where Austin has arranged not only a candlelit dinner, but they're being serenaded by real-life swinger legend Burt Bacharach singing What the World Needs Now. And Mike, as Austin, twirls Elizabeth Hurley as they dance on the top of this bus. And for one take, he accidentally twirled her a little too hard, and she just went careening towards the edge of the railing and nearly tumbled over the side before he grabbed her at the last second. And, I mean, can you imagine falling to your death as Burt Bacharach played his hits? I mean, that's pretty much how I want to go.
See, that sounds like the worst possible thing for me.
Really?
Which is
I love
illustrative
that.
of our personality. Yeah, I don't know. What would I want?
A mosh pit at
Slayer.
Rancid?
Yeah. Tom Waits.
Yeah.
That's all too appropriate. That's all a little too on the nose. Yeah, and you mentioned that Mike's dad was a fan of Burt's, so this is another thing about his dad issues.
I think that was the last scene that they filmed, actually, was just cruising up and down the street. And Jay Roach later said that the Las Vegas authorities gave him permission to just cruise the strip all night long, dancing to Burt Bacharach on the top deck of a double-decker bus. I mean, to me, that
does sound pretty nice.
That's an all-time moment right there.
Yeah. And while we're talking about the music of Austin Powers, let's take a look at it. You know, it's got this sort of 90s, 60s throwback thing, which was a big trend. The Cardigans, Edwyn Collins, who was in Orange Juice, the Lightning Seeds, Divinals, the Wondermints, who were Brian Wilson's backing band at one point. And then, of course, the theme song, which is probably the music that I remember, Burt Bacharach and Soul Bossa Nova.
Yeah.
Recorded by the great Quincy Jones. The guy who plays the flute solo on that is Rahsaan Roland Kirk, who's this tremendous jazz musician who's blind and famous for doing these incredible heroic feats of like circular breathing. Like there's these really wild clips of him on YouTube where he's playing two saxophones that he would work on. He worked on all of his own instruments and modified them so that he could play all this stuff one-handed, and he just jams them both in his mouth and does these like incredible solos that it's insane. It's like it looks faked because he just plays these unnaturally long lines because he was this master of circular breathing. Kind of like, well, no, I'm not going to say it. I was going to say kind of like Kenny G playing like a saxophone note for 8 hours, but actually much cooler than Kenny G. Anyway, we can't say anything more about Quincy Jones. He says he wrote this in 20 minutes in 1962. Yeah, it sounds like that. It's like three riffs just kind of stacked on top of each other. And so another Canadian reference here. Mike Myers knew that as the theme song to a Canadian game show called Definition that he grew up watching. So it's an in-joke for Canadians that he threw it in. And apparently he and Quincy were tight because Quincy Jones hosted SNL in 1990, and he said, yeah, sure, you can use this in your movie, Mike. This is where we would throw in something about, remember when Quincy Jones was doing all those interviews where he was like blowing up everybody in Hollywood?
Like he knew who killed JFK and threw the Beatles under the bus, and I think said that like Bernard Purdie was playing all of Ringo's parts, and I forget if he said that or just Bernard Purdie said that himself.
Bernard Purdie probably said that.
Yeah, that was interesting. That was fun.
So we've talked about all the stuff that made it into the movie. Let's start talking about what got cut out. One joke cut for the UK in particular is the bit where Dr. Evil is positing his various schemes for holding the world at ransom. And Robert Wagner's character, number 2, keeps pointing out why these won't work because, frozen for 30 years, just like Captain America. One of Dr. Evil's plans is to stage an affair to blackmail the British royal family. And number 2 says, Prince Charles did have an affair. He admitted it, and now they're divorced. And that was fine when the movie was released in May of 97, but it was released in the UK a week after Princess Diana had died. So they actually cut that line on the grounds of good taste, which is very sweet, considering they probably could have put in a joke about Prince Andrew and the Clintons. And, you all know. Other scenes that got left on the cutting room floor. The international version of the film does have these. The American cut doesn't because we can't handle anything that goes over 94 minutes. One of them is an extended version of the fight sequence between Austin and Random Task. Two, not one, but two scenes featuring Christian Slater as a hypnotized henchman. I shudder to think what that would have been like. Just like watching Jack Nicholson light doing it. Cryogenics gags that involved the defrosting of Gary Coleman, Evel Knievel, and Vanilla Ice. Evel Knievel might have been past their sell-by date as a reference by 97, don't you think?
Yeah.
Vanilla Ice, yeah, he's still fair game. And scenes where families of various slain henchmen are informed of their tragic and violent deaths. That sounds amazing, I have to say.
I wonder if it's on it has to be on the special features somewhere. I'm sure those are available somewhere. I haven't looked them up. I'll save that.
That's a shocking oversight from you. How dare you come on to this, my podcast, unprepared.
This 20-page outline.
I'm sick of carrying you up and down the court 45 minutes a night. All right, Jordan, cue us into one of the darker things about this film.
Yes. I was really excited to watch all of those bonus scenes, except for the extended Random Task fight. His scenes are a little hard for me to watch because the actor who played Random Task is in prison where he killed his cellmate. The actor who played Random Task is known professionally as Joe Son, and he was a South Korean mixed martial arts fighter, and he also performed as a singer and dancer at wrestling events in Japan. But of course,
side note, I love how in most Eastern fighting cultures, all of these guys sing. Like Jackie Chan has singles out, Manny Pacquiao has songs out.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's like you train yourself to... You train your body and then you train your soul to sing. Oh, that's ridiculous. What does Random Task's song sound like?
I haven't looked. I don't know if they actually were released as singles or not. I think it just might have been like his bit that he would do in between fights. I'm not sure though.
Okay, sure. All right, carry on.
But of course, he also acted, and his career took off playing the lead villain in the 1994 film Viper, as well as appearing in the Dolph Lundgren-led action film Joshua Tree in 1993. But obviously, Austin Powers was his big breakout role, and fame would be fleeting, and by 2008, he'd been convicted of felony vandalism and placed on probation, which he repeatedly violated. And as a result, Joe Son was given a harsher sentence and forced to provide a DNA sample, and this is when things got really weird. Joe Son's DNA sample linked him to a cold case from 1990, the details of which are grotesque and brutal, and I don't really care to get into it. Google it if you must, but to give you a hint, the many charges, which include torture on Christmas Eve, carried a maximum sentence of 275 years to life if convicted. The freaky part of this all is that the victim had a copy of Austin Powers in their home. So presumably they watched their assailant in this comedy, anyway, moving on.
Keep reading, please. Get us out of this. Get us out of this nightmare.
Joe Son was sent to prison in September of 2011 for a minimum of 7 years, and within a month, he had beaten his cellmate to death in the prison yard and placed in solitary confinement. He was sentenced in 2017 to an additional 27 years minimum in prison, where I would imagine he is likely to stay. There's no graceful way to make this transition. I feel like this is one of the most common factoids with all the movies we've done so far. Despite its status as a classic that launched one of the most successful, or at least one of the most hilarious franchises in cinema history, Austin Powers was not a huge box office hit. Even the premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater was a bit of a sad trombone. Seth Green recalls that nobody even bothered to take his picture.
Oh.
He later said it felt like it just wasn't happening. It performed okay in U.S. theaters. It made $53.9 million from the initial $16.5 million budget, though it underperformed overseas, which led it to be dubbed something of a flop. And Jay Roach later said, people didn't know what to make of it. It's weird. This guy with an English accent, hair all over his body, and bad teeth. It's like a hallucination.
Well, when you put it like that, yeah.
Yeah, sure. But thanks in large part to its quotability, The movie really scored through home video, VHS, and especially the early DVD market, because this was actually one of the first movies that were released on DVD, and the vibrant colors made it really well suited to this, well, these higher definition format. And the bonus scenes were sort of a revelation too. This was like, one of the first movies that had bonus scenes on the DVD release.
Right.
So this helped sow the seeds for the 1999 sequel, The Spy Who Shagged Me, which grossed a massive $312 million worldwide, more than 5 times as much as the first film. And altogether, the franchise earned $676 million in theaters worldwide, just theaters alone. And this earned a lot of money, not only for Mike Myers, but also the actress Demi Moore, who served as producer on all 3 films. Not many people know that.
And Austin Powers had an impact on the Bond series. The mockery directed towards 007 reportedly caused Bond producers, the Broccoli family, and presumably others, but they're like the main stewards of that, to take another look at the franchise, and we get the gritty reboot, one of the archetypal gritty reboots, along with like Batman Begins, that kind of started that as a mockable term, is their Casino Royale, which is itself different from the Bond spy parody Casino Royale starring Peter Sellers that Austin Powers is partially based on. It's just like
I've gone cross-eyed.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
We could get into the whole weird kerfuffle of why Casino Royale in 67 was a parody and not the real movie, but it's too... Yeah, Google it if you're interested, but it's not that interesting.
That way madness lies. Yeah, so... But it took them 5 years to do that, because this comes out in, 98? And Brosnan's...
97. Well, think of how
97.
long these movies are in advance,
Yeah, that's true. Brosnan probably had a bunch more on his contract, and they were like, we got to make it through all of these. The only way out is through. Daniel Craig himself put a very fine point on it. He said, "We had to destroy the myth because Mike Myers us. I am a huge Mike Myers fan, so don't get me wrong, but he kind of us, made it impossible to do the gags. The truth of it is I always had this plan in my head that we got to make them and begin again and bring a serious side back to Bond," which he did. Daniel Craig's great. You mentioned that this turned into a $6-figure million, $500 million franchise, which unsurprisingly led to talk of other spin-offs. So in 1999, after they made The Spy Who Shagged Me, and before they made Goldmember, which is it's like Godfather 3. We don't really talk about Goldmember. HBO made a deal for a 13-episode Austin Powers cartoon series, which was never brought to fruition. So naturally, the question on everybody's lips in this era of reboots and requels and gritty reboots, will there be a 4th Austin Powers? There have been several reports over the past 15 years that another installment is in development. And as recently as, not recently, as 6 years ago, Jay Roach said that although there's no movie in the works currently, Mike Myers and I talk about it every time we get together. I would say it's in a latent phase right now, but someday, if we find the right idea, for sure. Mike gave me the break of a lifetime in letting me direct the first film, so I'm always good to go. But after Vern Troyer, who played Mini-Me, died in 2018, Roach has been less into it. He told The Independent, "To be honest, I don't know how we'd do it without Vern. We always had ideas of revealing a whole life that would have taken his character much further." I'm sorry to laugh at that, but the idea that the 4th Austin Powers is held up because they wanted to do a Mini-Me backstory and couldn't see any other way out.
We'd love to make this $500 million grossing film, but one of our tertiary characters can no longer appear in it. Not to be insensitive.
No, yeah, Vern's great in that, but it's just like it's like, what was their B plan? Like a fat bastard Joker style reimagining? Like, come on, guys. So yeah, Myers reportedly had a loose idea for a prequel that would explore Austin and Dr. Evil's battles in the 60s.
That'd be cool.
Leading up to the freezing. Yeah, there's another gritty reboot. But with each passing year, it is starting to look less and less likely. But, I guess you could reframe that Uber Eats commercial as a kind of light at the end of the tunnel. If all the Shrek residuals have dried up, there's not another one of those on the horizon, and Uber can pay him enough money to get into a commercial, we're probably going to get an Austin Powers reboot.
I hope so.
I hope Christopher Nolan does it.
So I'd like to end this episode with my favorite story concerning Austin Powers. One of my favorite stories ever, in fact. As we said at the top of the episode, the DNA of this franchise can be traced to the three Bs: Bond, British comedy, and the Beatles. Mike Myers performed with Monty Python, and he honored Sean Connery at various public functions. And thanks to Austin Powers, he got the ultimate accolade from one of the Beatles. As I said, the Beatles were such a huge creative inspiration for Mike Myers and what they meant to his family, who, like the Beatles, were from Liverpool. Liverpool was a pretty poor, rundown place until the Beatles made it cool. And in a sense, it gave some dignity to the Myers family heritage. And it meant a lot to Mike's whole family. And he's appeared in numerous documentaries over the years talking about how much the Beatles had meant to him and his family. And he specifically talks about the story about how he went to see A Hard Day's Night with his older brothers, and at the scene when the helicopter takes off at the end of the movie and the Beatles fly away, he started to cry because he wanted to keep hanging out with the Beatles, which I can 1,000% relate to. And George was always his favorite because he said that it looked like his dad to him, and it always reminded him of his dad. So the day that George Harrison died in November of 2001, it was obviously a dark day for all Beatles fans. But on the same day, Mike Myers received a letter from George, which by all accounts is the last letter that George Harrison ever wrote. And it was a fan letter about Austin Powers. And bizarrely, this all seems like, really makes you question fate. He was on the set of Goldmember filming the intro to the movie within a movie bit with all the megastars, and it apparently wasn't going well, and he had all these big power players on the set, and it was just really stressful. And then he saw the news that George had died, and he started to cry, and he thought to himself, oh my God, this is the worst day of my life. One of my heroes has died, and my professional career is about to tank today. And then moments later, he was handed this letter. And it was from George, and he talks about having a Dr. Evil doll. And I guess towards the end of his life, when he was too ill to speak in business meetings, he would pull the pull string on this Dr. Evil doll and have Dr. Evil say, why must I be surrounded by frickin' idiots? Which is amazing.
Yeah.
And I guess George Harrison heard the story of little Mike Myers crying at the end of A Hard Day's Night when the Beatles flew away. And at the end of this note, he wrote, I'm sorry I left you on the helicopter that day. I promise I won't do it again. To reiterate, Mike Myers receives this letter the day George Harrison died, and that is the kicker on the letter. Well,
That's rough.
yeah.
This episode going for the various gut and heartstrings. Good Lord.
Yeah, I'm now too choked up to speak anymore, which is not how I expected to end an episode about one of the best comedy franchises of the last 25 years. But here we are.
Yeah, to quote another Mike Myers creation, I'm getting verklempt. Talk amongst yourselves.
Oh, man. Well, Heigl, that was really special for me. I hope you enjoyed that. That was
it good for you too? Sorry to undercut all of your touching moments with
no, please, I
acerbic.
need that.
Yeah, acerbic vinegar. But yeah, I learned a lot. I hope everyone else learned a lot, and I hope the emotional wounds that we inflicted this episode will heal. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. Thanks so much for listening to Too Much Information. We'll catch you next time. Too Much Information was a production of iHeart Radio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The supervising producer is Mike Johns,
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
with original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
Mm-hmm.